Hi there. This is my commentary on Chapter 10 of Lila, An Inquiry into Morals by Robert M. Pirsig. In this Chautauqua, I would like not to cut any new channels of consciousness, but simply dig deeper into old ones that have become silted in with the debris of thoughts grown stale and platitudes too often repeated. Okay, that's a passage from Chapter 1 of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and much of this chapter, Chapter 10 of Lila, is sort of a riff on this theme. So it's really interesting in Pirsig's work to see themes repeated in different ways, presented in different ways, but the same theme as the philosophy develops or is contemplated. The debris of thoughts grown stale and platitudes too often repeated. That's what we're looking at. Also in this chapter, you're going to get to know Lila by getting inside her head a little bit more. And you'll see how her problems are related to how stale her thoughts are. So getting to know Lila's mental state is an interesting prospect. What do we know about her so far? Well, we know from Chapter 1 that waking up in a hungover daze in a strange man's bed is not unusual for her. And we also know that she's rather coarse, judging by her behavior in the bar and by her complaining nature. From another point of view of what we know about her, we've learned from Rigel. So it's easy to kind of categorize her at this point as kind of a bar floozy and not really think twice about it. There's a report from Rigel that she was once very good looking and that she's lost her looks. So we're going to infer that she skated by on her looks for a long time, and now she's a little bit desperate. So in Fiedler's self-deprecating way, she ends up with him. So she's very in the moment about instant gratification, whether it's food or sex or another drink. She's close to the bone when it comes to valuation. She instantly knows what she likes or dislikes. And rather than being at all reflective, she ruminates on how the situations she remembers were pleasurable or frustrating. Most of her concerns seem to be around her physical needs, or in being entertained, whether she's feeling pleasure or pain, whether the situation she's in will bring brief amounts of ease and fun or hardship. She thinks transactionally. Her sense of quality, of ease and pleasure versus hardship and frustration, figures into her calculating mind. Of in the moment, how can I get the former and not the latter with what I've got to work with right now? That's why she's willing to stick around with this egghead rather than take the bus to New York City, where she may know some more exciting people, although she's not really sure if they're even there anymore. So it's a mistake, though, to be so sure about who Lila really is, that she's just this very sort of reactive bar floozy. After all, we're starting to learn something about her. And that is her continual dissatisfaction, let's say, is an expression of something underlying, some emerging mental health problem, which has already been diagnosed because she's taking pills, but that she claims not to understand. And it's funny, it's very much the same way Fiedler's own condition was described in Zen at the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, because he kind of talks us through what he went through, not in the first person like he does with Lila, but the process of his thoughts as he got more and more mentally unstable. And there are triggers for her as they were for him, and the triggers for this unstoppable wave, as she kind of describes it, are things like seeing the dead dog in the river, remembering her grandfather's warning to sinners, that they would go to the island of the dead, the name of the gorge they are approaching, which is called World's End, and of course, her mother. She does enjoy entertainment, as I said, which is pleasurable without being challenging, and she can scarcely believe that the captain doesn't share her enthusiasm for the Jungle Queen, that big fancy boat. But we know why he doesn't, and I'm going to read a passage again from Zen, the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. This is from Chapter 25. It's the style that gets you, technological ugliness syruped over with romantic phoniness in an effort to produce beauty and profit by people who, though stylish, don't know where to start because no one has ever told them there's such a thing as quality in this world. And it's real, not style. Quality isn't something you lay on top of subjects and objects like tinsel on a Christmas tree. Real quality must be the source of subjects and objects, the cone from which the tree must start. And he, as much as says that, when he looks at a picture of the Jungle Queen, and let's and reads the pamphlet, and let's listen to this description of the Jungle Queen with that passage from 25 of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance that I just read in mind. The boat looked like a big, beautiful wedding cake with 2 layers covered with curly-hued frosting. On the front was the state flag of Florida. The picture was so real you wanted to stick your finger in it and feel how warm the water was. So they've set up the whole thing to be this sort of experience of some kind of Florida 19th century riverboat with smokestacks that don't work and that just sort of give the illusion of this conception you have of, romantic southern times on the Mississippi River or whatnot. This southern, it's a very stereotypical experience that they're trying to give you, and then in this chapter they'll certainly explain the cliched and low quality entertainment value of this ship, or of this boat rather, and that's what the captain objects to. He says beauty should be bottom up, not top down, not pasted on. It should emerge from the cone, like he says in chapter 5. Beauty isn't things trying to look like something else. Beauty is things just being what they are, he said. There probably isn't one thing on that boat that's original. It should come from the seed. Real beauty develops through the impetus of quality on its own. So, back to Lila. She has absolutely no shame about sex at all. Zero. Societal influence seems to have no bearing on her use of sex for both pleasure and currency. And listen to this passage when she starts thinking about Florida, in that sort of in the moment, pleasure-oriented way. Once she went shrimp fishing at night under a bridge with the lights, and afterward they all cooked the shrimp and took it to the beach and drank cold beer, and there was more than anyone could eat. Oh, they were good. She could remember how soft and warm the wind was, and how they were all so stuffed, and they laid down under the palm trees, and they drank rum and coke, and they talked, and they made love all night long until the sun came up over the ocean. She wondered where they were now, those guys. She'd probably never see them again. So she happily made love with, a group of guys all night long. And, of course, it's her lot in life that she'll never see them again. She doesn't think, oh, I feel so terrible about myself that I did that when I was drunk. No, she doesn't think that. She just sort of thinks about this loss of pleasure. That's how it is for her. Pleasure, she has it, and then it goes away, and she has to find some other source of it. There's a vague sadness at this lost ease, pleasure, but no remorse. There's a very, very basic biological understanding of this kind of thing. And there's no sense, there's no societal problem with it for her. But there's no sense that she could change things, like these guys just go away and there's nothing she can do about it. Things just change on the outside. They just happen. Her inability to understand that she can change things, that she could potentially determine her future, could be one of the reasons that when she goes into these mental health situations, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, it's her mother that's haunting her with shoulds, and shoulds aren't fun. They're not entertaining. They're not pleasurable in the moment. They require responsibility and planning, and she's increasingly losing her capacity, what little capacity she had for planning. She's increasingly losing it. Her mental instability begins to emerge in several of her reflections, and here's a few of them. Everything was all changed again. Yesterday she was going to Florida on the Karma. Now she was on this boat. Her life was really getting worse and worse. She knew it. She used to at least plan things a little. Now everything happened without any plans at all. So things at this point, they just happened to her. Okay, there's a little bit about her mother. And she's going, she kind of declines. She starts remembering her mother. Oh God, not her. Why was it her mother? Appeared when her hands started shaking. And shaking of hands is one of the signs that she's going to have a mental health episode, a breakdown, let's just say. The men her mother liked were always rich, like the captain here, and Sydney. They were the real hustlers, the women who marry for money. She shouldn't think about her mother. She shouldn't think about her mother at all. And of course, it always goes back to the parents, doesn't it? Well, maybe not always, but that is, that's since we're talking about cliches, that's certainly a cliche. Okay, then she says, it was coming. The wave was coming. The pills weren't going to stop it. Something terrible was coming. Something was going to happen. It couldn't go on like this. She could just feel it in her bones. It was coming. That sounds a lot like how Phaedrus, as he's sort of getting closer and closer to this quality thing and in the art of motorcycle maintenance, he starts to feel this thing coming. There was a shift. There was a break. It was coming. Very similar. And there's a significant thing that Phaedrus, the captain, says that triggers the ghosts in her mind. He pointed up ahead. When we get to the mountain up there, the wind will probably start doing funny things. We'll have to stop sailing and run the engine. Where he pointed, the river seemed to run right into some mountains, at a turn called World's End, he added. And this is also, right around now, is where they find the dead dog, which will be an important element in describing Lila's condition. And remember what Rigel said. Remember that Rigel said Lila is from the sewer. Okay. These rivers are like sewers, the captain said. They take all the debris and poisons from the land and carry them out to sea. What poisons? Salts and chemicals. If you irrigate land without drainage, it loads up with poisons and becomes dead. Think about that. Think about that passage from chapter 1 it's in the art of motorcycle maintenance. Nothing grows. The rivers keep the land clean and fresh. All this debris is on the same journey we are. Where? What do you mean? To the ocean. Oh, well, we're just going to New York, she said. So there's several things to say about this passage besides the fact that it's reflected by that what I read from chapter 1 and from Zam. That debris isn't going to make it to the ocean to get cleared out. It's just going to get stuck in there, at least on Lila's case, because she's going to end in Manhattan. So that's a sort of one of these topographical descriptions. She's only going to New York, so there's no chance for this debris to get cleared out. And Paul Go pointed out in the comments when I read the chapter that this debris floating by is like the chaotic debris in her mind. And, it is one of these topographical analogies that Pirsig provides. If we're looking at this river as a clearing out of debris, which potentially should reach the ocean, be dispersed, that's what should happen. That's what should happen for Lila's mind, but it's not going to, because she's going to stop in the big city, the big dirty city. It certainly was a big dirty city at that time, and I guess it is again. And that means it's just going to stay in there milling around forever for her to ruminate on, and nothing new, nothing's going to flow it out. You remember the teacup analogy. You have to, I think it was in chapter 3 or 4, where you have to throw out the old tea to put new tea in. Like when he's writing his notes, he puts down the things on the note cards so he can empty his mind so new stuff can come in. So that's also a description. Another way he frames this process. And we do notice that she's really not open to new ideas. You always see her pushing back against anything the captain says to suggest any alternative view. Now, it might be out of her capacity to understand, but at the same time, she's so resistant to anything he says against her fixed beliefs. And she's extremely upset when he tells her that the lack of originality and pandering to customers' fixed ideas, to cliches, that the singer on the Jungle Queen does is like prostitution, and that really hits a nerve in Lila. Those memories, those whirls are fixed in there to bother her when she starts going downhill mentally. They don't transform, they haunt her. These memories to her, they don't update really. They just kind of stay in there and ruminate. And to top it off, her dog Lucky shows up in the river, as at least this is what she thinks it is. As her delusions increase, she believes that this is her dog. And so there's an interesting passage which expresses her ability to go in and out of worlds. I can remember so many worlds, she says. I'm not sure what I mean by that. But there are so many worlds, and I just touch them, and I'm in them for a moment, and then I'm out of them again, which describes her fixed memories. But they also describe the way she relates to him, which sort of is like, the way she describes this is kind of like a flashback or a delusion, like they are happening right this minute, like they're real, rather than memories. She seems to have the ability to briefly inhabit these memories, and this is sort of another indication of her disorder, of the fact that she's disorder has a delusional quality. So I've worked with severely mentally ill people in the past, as most mental health professionals do when they, at some point, most mental health professionals will be working with severely mentally ill people in poverty. And so I've got a little bit of an idea of what's going on with her, even though I don't treat clients like this now. And I think her diagnosis would be schizoaffective disorder, which is sort of, it's some variation. It's got delusional qualities of schizophrenic, but it's not full-on schizophrenia. It's sort of delusion mixed with affect regulation and emotional volatility. So it's sort of what they say, a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, some variation of that, diagnoses are really they're really so you can coordinate treatment. They aren't that fixed. There's a delusional quality to a lot of mental illnesses, and that comes from it can come from trauma, or it can be biological. What we're looking at, it seems to be more biological. It seems to be more related to schizophrenia, whereas Fetus never had schizophrenia. He had something more like mania, or something like PTSD. Maybe it was more a type of bipolar, but I think Fetus's diagnosis was more PTSD from just these amazing things that he was discovering. And PTSD definitely is another non-biological disorder that can result in delusions. So when Lila says, so there's one point where Phaedrus says he's writing about this, he's a travel writer. He basically tells her, I guess he thinks that's what she'll understand. And he says that he's going to be writing about this trip. And Lila says, how can you do that? Nothing is happening. And he says, there's always something happening, he said. When you say nothing is happening, you're just saying nothing is happening that fits your cliche of what something is. What? It's hard to explain, he said. Something is happening right now, and you think it's unimportant because you've never seen a movie of it. But if you saw 3 movies in a row of people sailing down the Hudson River, maybe a TV documentary about Washington Irving and the history of the Hudson River, then you got on this trip, you'd say, boy, this is sure something, because what you were seeing fits some mental picture you already had planned in his mind. So like the static cliches of the imposed smokestacks on the gingerbread boat, and the cliches of the water and the moon and the flags and all that, this describes these fixed ideas in Lila's head. But if you are more mentally flexible, if you're more, if you're more attuned to quality, if you're not stuck in these cliches, if you're not just looking for entertainment, if you are more able to challenge yourself mentally, if you're more mentally flexible, then you would see the dynamic quality on that river trip. You wouldn't need some movie to tell you how great the Hudson River was. So as she's sort of kind of moving into this direction of a mental breakdown or mental instability, there's a section where she thinks about her grandfather, the preacher. Obviously, a real Bible thumper who was always talking about good and evil and how she would go to hell for her sins if she wasn't good. And then she remembers a print of a painting he had hanging on the wall of a boatman taking people over to the island of the dead. The boatman was taking people across the river to hell, to the island, because they had sinned. So Paul found that picture, and here it is. it's isolated, and it gives the impression, very isolated, and gives like islands are, and it gives the impression of being these jagged, ominous mountains, rigid, jagged mountains, kind of give this feeling of enclosure that we're talking about, like the mind of this person in turmoil. All that stuff is happening in here, and it's not going anywhere. That's what this island has, all this enclosed bad stuff in there, and it can't get out, and nothing can come in. And she starts getting a sense that about this island, it's going to figure in. And as she descends further, oh, and one thing I want to say is another thing that Paul researched is that right where they are is an island called Polypel Island, on which there is a ruin of a castle-type structure, typical of the turn of the century. If you see in New York, 19th century buildings, they all have a lot of them have this castle-like qualities, made out of brownstone and red sandstone. And this castle once stored munitions, so you can look that up. I'll put a link to the Wikipedia page. As she descends further into delusion, she starts to think of the dead dog they saw floating in the river. And of course, she thinks now that this dog is her dead dog, Lucky. It looked like Lucky. Why should he come back now? She knew they were coming to that place in the mountains. What did the captain say it was? End of the world? What did he mean by that? What did he mean? It sounds ominous enough, and it is, I guess, the catalyst that really triggers her psychosis. And what World's End is the deepest part of the Hudson River, and it's dangerous to navigate, so there's an ominous quality to that. And then you have this island there, this isolated thing with the castle on it. You have this island idea in her head, etc. So you've got this whole dynamic going on in her mind that begins to relate to each other. And there's another interesting and kind of related point, related to a lot of the stuff that's happening in this chapter, because, Pirsig's work is very interrelated, as you can see. So remember that boat she was supposed to be on, it was called the Karma. She listened to the sound of the wind above and the lapping sound of the water on the hull. So quiet, so different from the Karma. Okay, so the Karma is not quiet. And Lila is embedded in karma. She's living the same chaotic thing over and over again. Her life is the succession of sad pursuits of whatever kind of ease and pleasure with whatever man she can find. And this happens over and over again. And then she gets dumped, or she dumps, or, and it's a really kind of miserable existence. And the wheel of samsara is going over and over again. And the quietness of Phaedrus's boat indicates a state of not knowing, a potential for quality. It's that beginner's mind of Zen. And this also undergirds much of the philosophy of Pirsig, which integrates that fresh approach to reality as it unfolds versus preconceived notions, which the preconceived notion problem is a lot of what this chapter describes. So the fixed nature of Lila's mind is indicative of what you're trying to fix in therapy, because, and this is my opinion as I kind of formulate my own understanding of mental health, through the lens of Pirsig, which is, certainly an ongoing project. That is, if your mind is closed, like we're describing here, if it has these fixed ideas that can't be transformed, that can only be increased or decreased, or can only become stronger or weaker, but don't actually transform. If your mind is a cultural immune system, let's say, you're going to have a hard time adapting to changes that will invariably occur. You're always going to be trying to, manipulate your world into what you need it to be. You will always be looking for some kind of certainty. And I think that one of the great keys to mental health is a flexibility for what's happening as it arises, and a tolerance for uncertainty. And so finally, I just thought this was pretty amusing, something Lila said. This is for all you ladies who are attracted to those genius types. They're silent and aloof, and you think you've somehow made them mad, and they're ruminating about you and, thinking something bad about you. That's why they're so quiet. Well, here's a passage that describes what's actually going on in their heads. He would just sit for hours and not say a word, and I'd think he was really mad at me, and he wasn't mad at all. Some men are like that. He was just thinking about something else. Yes, that's the way I am too, says Phaedrus. So I hope that made sense, and I will see you next time.